hard to believe the pilot survived this crash, but he did. The pilot managing to steer away from the more populated areas of Long Island as the plane started to leak fuel before crashing into a dumpster near the ground. Meanwhile, in our nation's capital, incitement of insurrection. That's the single charge President Trump now faces from the House for unleashing a mob of his supporters who carried out a domestic terror attack. Nancy Pelosi says Trump could be impeached this week, calling the president deranged, unhinged, and dangerous. We'll hear from a Republican congresswoman tonight. Should there be accountability and consequences for those actions? If so, what?
Yeah, absolutely. There should be accountability for those actions from the president on down.
This as the FBI issues alarming warnings about armed protests in all states, groups threatening violence if President Trump is removed. Playing catch-up, the massive effort to track down the perpetrators of the attack. Tips continue to pour in while authorities examine the footage, including the new images coming in of officers being viciously attacked and potentially killed by the Trump mob. Money talks. The company's now cutting ties with President Trump and other Republicans who sought to overturn the election results and spread false information. How businesses are now holding them accountable and how Trump and his supporters are fighting back. Losing the larger battle, the virus takes on its own Operation Warp Speed, spreading at record rates. Tonight, the push to open new mega sites, LA and Miami stadiums switching from testing to vaccinations. Cities overrun by the virus, desperate for any relief.
We're at a tipping point. We can't add any more to this.
And hold on tight, because we're following Bitcoin on its wild ride. The digital currency is even being compared to gold. Good evening, everyone. I'm Lindsay Davis. Thanks so much for streaming with us. At the end of 2021, columnists argued that it was time to retire the word unprecedented because it had been used so much in the past year, and it's a word that is intended to be used sparingly. But already 2021 in its infancy is proving the word unprecedented remains relevant for a number of reasons. Impeachment proceedings are now set to get underway, and if successful, President Trump would be the first U.S. president to be impeached twice. And the fallout from the Capitol riot has now fanned across the country. Tonight, federal law enforcement officials are warning authorities in state capitals to increase security following threats and concerns that an emboldened far-right wing may now turn to targets closer to home. And 5 days after that assault on democracy, serious questions remain about why the U.S. Capitol Police were not better prepared. Today, D.C. police did brief the public, and we learned that 56 officers were injured and that some officers described last week's riot as scarier than 2 tours in Iraq. Tonight, Democrats in Congress are demanding answers and accountability. Our Mary Bruce leads us off tonight in Washington.
Tonight calls for accountability as the horror of the siege on the Capitol comes into clear view. Rioters seen beating an officer with an American flag. President Trump's supporters trying to hunt down his own vice president after he refused to overturn the results of the election, chanting, "Hang Mike Pence." House Democrats are now moving quickly to try and remove Trump from office, introducing a single article of impeachment, charging the president with incitement of insurrection for inciting violence against the government of the United States by urging his followers to march on the Capitol.
Well, sadly, the person who's running the executive branch is a deranged, unhinged, dangerous President of the United States.
The House Speaker detailing to 60 Minutes how her staffers hid, horrified, as the mob overtook her offices.
The staff went under the table, barricaded the door, turned out the lights, and were silent in the dark.
Under the table?
Under the table for 2.5 hours.
Wow. 60 Minutes obtaining this audio of what her staffers heard, the president's supporters trying to bang down the door. The speaker is now pressuring Pence to act first, urging the vice president to invoke the 25th Amendment and immediately remove Trump from office. It seems highly unlikely, but Pence notably hasn't publicly rejected the idea. The vice president seen at the White House today, but we're told he and Trump haven't spoken since the riot. Several members of the president's party, like Senator Pat Toomey, say Trump should resign.
I do think
The president committed impeachable offenses.
Some of the president's top allies are also turning on him.
You know,
so you think it was an impeachable offense?
Before Jordan. Oh, sure. Yeah. If inciting to insurrection isn't, then I don't really know what is.
Tonight, prominent freshman Republican Congressman Madison Cawthorn, who attended the rally with the president, said it was a, quote, major mistake for Trump to tell the crowd to head to the Capitol and that he'd be there with them.
You know, he never should have directed that crowd towards the Capitol building because they, you know, just there was a bad outcome was destined at that point.
But even after the riot, Cawthorn and more than 100 House Republicans stood by the president and voted to overturn the will of the voters. And tonight, the vast majority of congressional Republicans aren't saying one way or another if Trump should go.
My personal view is that the president touched the hot stove on Wednesday and is unlikely to touch it again.
As for the president, he's been holed up in the White House, silent since Twitter permanently kicked him off the site due to the risk of further incitement of violence. But breaking her silence today, the First Lady, Melania Trump, says she was disappointed and disheartened by the insurrection, but that she's been treated unfairly, saying it's shameful that surrounding these tragic events, there has been salacious gossip, unwarranted personal attacks, and false, misleading accusations on me. It's unclear what she's talking about. Sunday, Trump finally lowered the flags to half staff at the White House in honor of Officer Brian Sicknick, who was injured in the chaos and later died. Pelosi, Pence, and President-elect Joe Biden have all spoken with the officer's family, but not the president. He still hasn't said a word about Officer Sicknick's death.
Mary Bruce joins us now from Washington. Mary, walk us through the next couple of days on Capitol Hill. It would seem that Democrats do have the votes for impeachment.
They do. They have more than enough votes from Democrats to pass this impeachment resolution. And we do expect that some Republicans will get on board with this as well. Now, a vote is expected on Wednesday. That is assuming that the vice president does not follow Pelosi's request here and go ahead and invoke the 25th Amendment to remove the president immediately. That certainly seems unlikely. So since the vice president, it doesn't seem, is going to act, Nancy Pelosi has said she will, which means, Lindsay, that by the end of this week, President Trump could be impeached for a second time, something we simply have never seen before in our nation's history.
And we're also learning that Minority Leader Chuck Schumer, soon to be Majority Leader, is considering using special authority to force the Senate to act sooner if the House does, in fact, impeach Trump.
Yeah, there is a lot of debate here among Democrats about how to handle a trial in the Senate. Now, it seems most likely that a trial wouldn't begin until after Joe Biden takes office. Chuck Schumer tonight is trying to change that. He's pushing to use this special authority to try and get a Senate trial underway before Biden takes office. But the problem here is that it would require Mitch McConnell to sign off, and I just don't think that's going to happen. But look, it then puts Democrats in a really tough position because they want to hold Trump accountable, but Joe Biden is also eager to get to work and wants to try and heal and unite the country. That's a hard thing to do if you're in the middle of a Senate trial of the former president. Now, Biden today suggested that maybe Congress could split its time between working on his agenda and a Senate trial, while other top Democrats say just wait, postpone a trial in the Senate at least until after Biden gets through his first 100 days. So, Lindsay, there are a lot of unknowns here tonight about how all of this is going to play out.
Right. Never a dull moment. And how those next 9 days do play out will likely be included in history books for time to come. Mary, our thanks to you.
Thank you.
As for President Trump, he has been out of sight for several days now, holed up at the White House, stripped of his social media accounts and unlikely to resign. So what's his next move? Our chief White House correspondent, Jonathan Karl, joins us now. John, the president is making plans for his last days in office. What's the latest on the thinking inside the White House, including on this idea of a self-pardon by the president?
Well, the president had been making it clear for some time that he fully intended to pardon himself, to issue kind of a blanket pardon for anything that he could have been accused of while he was president. But he's now been warned by some of his lawyers that if he does that, he could make himself more vulnerable to civil lawsuits, including from anyone that was hurt in the Capitol riot, because a self-pardon could be seen as an admission that he did something wrong. The president has not taken this news well. He is angry, and he is now suggesting that he doesn't want to do any pardons at all. The attitude seems to be, if I can't get a pardon for myself, well, then nobody else should get one either. Lindsay?
Jonathan Karl, we appreciate you as always.
Thank you.
And now to the investigation now underway in all 50 states. The images of the siege leading to some arrests, and more tips are being followed up on now. So who were the rioters and how coordinated was the attack? Here's ABC's Martha Raddatz.
These pro-Trump rioters came from every part of the country, a violent mob assaulting the Capitol and the police. This new video showing one of the rioters heave a fire extinguisher at a line of police, striking several in the head. Homicide investigators probing the death of Capitol Police Officer Brian Sicknick have been looking into reports that he may have been hit with a fire extinguisher, but unclear if it is Sicknick in the video. And this new and horrifying video, watch the man in the white hat and backpack pull an officer to the ground as the rioters drag him by the legs, pummeling him with the poles carrying American flags. Tonight, FBI field officers in all 50 states combing through videos and images, along with some 45,000 tips. A senior official telling ABC News the mob had leadership, communications equipment, and the expertise of former military officers like Larry Brock, who police say is seen here in the Capitol holding white flex cuffs. The Texas-based Air Force officer and combat veteran turned in by his ex-wife, according to an FBI affidavit. And Eric Munchell, a Tennessee bartender, also arrested. Law enforcement officials say Munchell appears to be the man here, also carrying plastic restraints, prompting questions about whether the mob intended to take hostages. But it seems clear what the intent was here, as rioters smashed through the glass to gain entrance to where House members were huddled. Ashley Babbitt, another Air Force veteran, seen climbing up through the smashed window. And from the other side, an officer fires a shot, killing Babbitt. One of 5 dead. Today, the D.C. police chief emotional after watching that video of his officer being crushed by rioters.
It makes me sick to my stomach to see that video. And that officer, obviously, he was afraid for his life.
And this officer now being praised for his quick thinking. The Washington Post reporting the officer deliberately led the mob away from the Senate chamber after noticing the door to the chamber was open. The officer using himself as a decoy as the crowd followed and chased him. Tonight, the man who police say led that mob, Doug Jensen, now in custody. That's right, Lindsay. Congressman Tim Ryan, who heads the subcommittee charged with Capitol Police funding, says one officer was seen taking a selfie with a rioter and another put on a MAGA hat and was allegedly giving directions to rioters. Ryan also said 10 to 15 additional officers are being investigated, some of them to see if they facilitated the breach of the Capitol, others posting perhaps on social media about the event. There are also investigations in the Pentagon into military officers and enlisted men and women to see if they took part. Many veterans, as we've said, were up there on the Hill, but they want to see if there are any more. Lindsay?
So likely more arrests to come. Martha Raddatz, our thanks to you. And now to the alarming warning tonight about the threat of violence heading into next week's inauguration of President-elect Joe Biden. The FBI now says that armed protests are planned in all 50 states. Will America's transition of power be safe? ABC's Chief Justice correspondent Pierre Thomas has those details.
After those horrifying images at the Capitol, federal authorities warning of more potential uprisings. The FBI bulletin alerting law enforcement across the country that armed protests are being planned at all 50 state capitals through Inauguration Day. Intelligence pointing to an unnamed armed group calling for the storming of government buildings and courthouses if President Trump is removed before January 20th. The FBI saying the group is also planning attacks here in D.C. the day of Biden's inauguration. Threats also identified against Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, and Nancy Pelosi.
If I'm scared of anything, it's for our democracy because we have a very extreme factions in our country that are armed and dangerous.
D.C.'s mayor requesting that all large-scale public events be canceled until at least January 24th. The Secret Service official overseeing security for the inauguration says expect an army.
You're going to see checkpoints. You're going to see barricades. You're going to see magnetometer screening. through all aspects and points of the city.
We're joined now by Pierre Thomas. Pierre, what can we expect next week in terms of security for Biden's inauguration?
Lindsay, the security here is going to be extraordinary. In addition to police, we expect 15,000 National Guard. They're taking no chances.
And Pierre, any indication just yet who was responsible for planting those pipe bombs at the RNC and DNC just a short distance from the Capitol?
Lindsay, that's a critical part of the investigation. They want to know who did that because they think that if they can find out who, it may give them answers as to how much planning actually went into this attack.
FBI busy looking into that as we speak. Pierre Thomas, our thanks to you. We're joined now by Republican Congresswoman Nancy Mace of South Carolina. She opposed the GOP challenge of the Electoral College vote and has called the storming of the Capitol an act of domestic terrorism. Thank you so much for joining us, Congresswoman. Now, you've been direct in calling out President Trump's role in inciting his supporters last week, but you also joined 6 of your fellow GOP House colleagues in writing a letter to the President-elect Biden this week and asking him to oppose efforts in the House to impeach the president a second time, writing, and I'd like to quote you here. A second impeachment only days before President Trump will leave office is as unnecessary as it is inflammatory. This impeachment would undermine your priority of unifying Americans and would be a further distraction to our nation. So some might argue that the president's actions have been inflammatory and divisive. And so my question to you is, should there be accountability and consequences for those actions? If so, what?
Yeah, absolutely. There should be accountability for those actions from the president on down. And it wasn't just the president that that enabled this violence to happen, that incited it. I mean, there were, if you watch the speeches or read the transcripts from the speeches that day, if you look at the rhetoric after the November election leading up to it, especially ratcheting up in the last 7 to 10 days, I mean, someone threatened to shoot me on social media over my desire to, my intention to vote to certify what should have been a ceremonial vote to certify the Electoral College. And so people do need to be held accountable. Right now, an impeachment, I mean, there's no way you can have an investigation or a trial or review evidence in the next week before Joe Biden is sworn in. An impeachment, articles of impeachment, when they come out of the House, will not get to the U.S. Senate until January 19th, casting a dark cloud over the inauguration of Joe Biden. I think that it is a risk to further divide the country. I worry about the peaceful transfer of power, particularly, with the inauguration coming up so soon after this violent act last week. I think that there are other options on the table, whether that's a bipartisan, bicameral commission to investigate. When you do an impeachment, it needs to be done over time. There needs to be deliberation. There needs to be due process. So we've got to be really careful about the precedent we set. Just like last week, talking about the constitutional precedent of certifying the Electoral College, the same thing goes for the impeachment. And so we've just got to be very careful and circumspect about it without pouring gasoline on the fire that already is across the United States, because there are a number of people all across the country that are in severe denial about what happened last week. And we've got to do better. 1, to acknowledge we've got a problem. 2, accept responsibility for it. And 3, figure out what are the solutions that we can work on together in a bipartisan manner to lead our country out of this crisis.
Now, some of those calling for impeachment, though, say it's necessary because the Senate could also vote to prevent President Trump from ever running for federal office again. Is that a valid reason to proceed with an impeachment process, even if it isn't completed before January 20th? Yeah. If not, what's to stop President Trump from continuing to divide the nation, which you say is your concern, and keeping up this idea with his supporters that he'll just run again in 2024?
Well, I don't think he runs again in 2024, but he only has 1 week left. And if articles of impeachment don't even get a trial, it doesn't get to the Senate until the 9th of January, you're kicking somebody out of office that's already out of office. Censure might be a potential option where you could prevent him from running from office again. But we've got to hold not just the president accountable, but all of the participants that participated in this charade.
Now, what about your fellow GOP colleagues who, even after the riots, still voted to challenge the results of the election? Democratic Congresswoman Cori Bush has put forward a resolution for their expulsion, and she cites Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, which states that no individual can serve in the House of Representatives who is engaged in disloyalty or sedition against the United States. Do you think that any GOP members should face consequences for their vote and for perpetuating the false idea that the election could be overturned?
Yeah. I haven't read what she's drafted or planning to file. That was my question to my own members of my own party today and in the previous days, is how do we hold ourselves accountable? Because if we sweep this under the rug, then the American people are not going to trust us, and they shouldn't trust us.
Now, you also said recently that you weren't going to participate in what you called the big lie that was being told to the American people, that the Congress or the Vice President could overturn the results of the election. But let's just press you on that for a moment, because before the vote, you joined with 6 other GOP House colleagues explaining your views. And in the first paragraph of the statement, you wrote, "We, like most Americans, are outraged at the significant abuses in our election system resulting from the reckless adoption of mail-in ballots and the lack of safeguards maintained to guarantee that only legitimate votes are cast and counted. The people cannot trust a system that refuses to guarantee that only legal votes are cast to select its leaders." So after more than 2 months of court challenges, investigations, and recounts in a handful of states, there's zero evidence of widespread voter fraud. Mail-in ballots widely adopted due to the pandemic, and there's still zero evidence that illegitimate ballots, even in small numbers, were cast and counted. So my question directly to you is, do you feel that you personally have any responsibility in perpetuating the idea that there was something questionable about the results of this election, which on both sides of the aisle, secretaries of state, judges have said this was valid?
Well, it's different in every state. So I've talked with some state legislatures in Pennsylvania now. I'm a bit of a cynic when it comes to elections. I think that there is voter fraud in almost every election, whether that's a voting machine, whether that's someone voting with a provisional ballot rather than a normal ballot cast. I've talked to lawmakers in Pennsylvania where they were shut down in state court. They're seeking relief in federal court. They have some, what I understand, some systematic voter fraud issues, but they're not new to 2020. These are things that have been around for a very long time, 4 years. I do think mass mail-in ballots are a problem. We saw states that mass mailed in ballots to voters who were deceased or voters who moved away or registered to vote in other states. These are problematic. These would have not changed the outcome of the election, but they are things that we need to look into, because the American voting system is only as good as people's confidence in it. And I do believe that those things have to be looked at and investigated.
Looking back now with the hindsight that you have, do you have any regrets that you use words like that we are outraged at the abuses of our election system?
No, I don't. I wish I'd spoken up sooner and let folks know that I wasn't going to certify the Electoral College. I did it about a week before the vote. I wish I'd done it long before that, because this rhetoric has been ratcheting up for 2 months, and seeing how it was almost like a light switch. And I didn't see it coming, but to be threatened to be shot on social media because I was following my oath to the Constitution is just wrong. And I'm going to work hard as I can to ensure that this never happens again, that we are held accountable for our language, for our actions, for our words across the board. And I want to work in that in a bipartisan way. And I intend to do just that over my term in Congress. I think it's extremely important that we correct the mistakes of the past and we move forward in a peaceful manner. We have to have a peaceful transition of power on January 20th. And that's what we all should be focused on right now.
And really, before you go, are you concerned at all about potential violence leading up to the inauguration? I
am. I very much am worried about potential violence, and we wouldn't be here today if it weren't the rhetoric of that rally, the rhetoric of folks that were misleading Americans, millions of Americans taking advantage of their hearts, their minds, and their wallets over the last two months. People truly believe that we could have overturned the results of an election. It just wasn't the case, and it's scary. I do worry for our country, and I worry about the safety of everyone who will be attending inauguration on the 20th. It's a very valid concern.
Congresswoman Nancy Mace of South Carolina, we really appreciate your time and coming on the show.
Of course.
We now shift to our nation's ongoing crisis with COVID. In the last 24 hours, 3,866 Americans have died due to the virus, many in the new American epicenter of California. Today, the LA County Health Director said that 10 people become infected every minute. But if you remember at the beginning of the pandemic, California was one of the first to shut down and flatten the curve. So where did things go wrong? Kaylee Hartung brings us this report.
This is the reality outside many hospitals in Southern California. Ambulances lined up, sometimes waiting for hours.
How long have you had to wait with patients in this parking lot today?
About
5-6 hours.
Yeah.
But yesterday I was at San Dimas Hospital, 17 hours in the back of a rig with a semi-critical patient, so it's getting pretty bad.
Since Thanksgiving, California's faced the highest surge of COVID-19 infections in the country. More than 22,000 people in the state now hospitalized with the virus. Paramedics describe scenes inside emergency rooms like a war zone. Patients packed into hallways, turning parking lots and gift shops into makeshift hospitals.
It looks like a bomb went off. Yeah. There's like people in C-collars, there's people bleeding, there's people stomach pain, there's COVID patients lined up all down the street. You know, it's bad.
That's what it means for a hospital to be overwhelmed right now.
Yeah, and all hospitals are overwhelmed. Like, one hospital say, hey, we're closed. You're all closed. It's like we have to go somewhere.
In Los Angeles, the situation's so dire that ambulance crews are forced to conserve oxygen for COVID patients and not transport other patients whose survival is unlikely.
They literally had the oxygen tubing and had a connector so that two patients were using basically the same oxygen flow at the same time. So resources are really low.
Because that was your best option.
That was the only option.
Saturday was California's deadliest day of the pandemic, with 695 deaths reported. Morgues and funeral homes are running out of space to put the bodies. LA County bringing in refrigerated trucks to store them.
Last month, we doubled the number that we normally would see of families that we helped through that. And this month, it looks like we will probably do 4 to 5 times the number of services for families that were affected by COVID-19.
But 8 months ago, health professionals dubbed the Golden State the California Miracle.
March was amazing because there was no good reason to believe that California wouldn't be New York. It was a ton of international travel, big, diverse place, coastal state.
In March, Governor Gavin Newsom issued the country's first stay-at-home order.
We can make decisions to meet moments. And this is a moment we need to make tough decisions, that we direct a statewide order for people to stay at home.
The results were remarkable. We watched with horror as we saw what was unfolding in New York. And California was pretty benign and stayed that way for the first couple of months.
For the next 3 months, California's curve remained flat, with fewer than 2,000 cases reported each day.
Well, they've done a good job, California.
In California, because we'd done so well in March and April, I think many people let their guard down, came to believe, we're invincible here. We've done okay. We're going to keep doing okay.
Then in June, California saw its first surge, 115,000 cases and 4,200 deaths. But the numbers were a fraction of the devastation in New York. A state with half of California's population saw more than 3 times as many cases and close to 30,000 deaths. And by July, many businesses were ordered to close again, as California saw per capita confirmed infection rates outpace the nation as a whole. 6 months later, much of California is back in lockdown, but there's no sign the virus is slowing down. The surge ripping through the state, and the highly contagious new COVID variant is adding to mounting fears.
I've been surprised. I think many people who've been following this carefully have been surprised. Not that we had a surge during the winter, but that it's lasted so long and been so devastating, particularly in Southern California.
LA County's public health director breaking down in tears over the surge's growing death toll.
Over 8,000 people who were beloved members of their families are not coming back.
Among the hardest hit, Latinos. They make up nearly 40% of the state's population, but nearly half the COVID deaths.
As overall deaths have begun to increase, we see that people in the lowest resourced areas are bearing a great deal of this burden. The gaps between race and ethnicity groups have now once again dramatically widened, particularly for our Latino residents.
Now Governor Newsom is scrambling to save his state and his political career. The sporadic lockdowns and slow rollout of the vaccine, coupled with his lavish dinner at the restaurant French Laundry, have led more than 1 million people to sign a petition for a recall election. There are 9 weeks left to collect the additional 500,000 signatures that would place the measure on a ballot.
We all thought the bottleneck was going to be the supply of vaccine. It just wasn't going to roll out of the factories as quickly as we needed it to. And to now understand that there are tens of millions of doses of vaccine sitting in freezers in California and elsewhere in the country is an outrage.
As California waits for the vaccine, the pressure on healthcare workers is crushing.
It's actually deployed to Hurricane Rita and Hurricane Katrina, and this is by far the worst disaster I've ever been involved in.
Bad as the situation is right now, what does worse even look like?
Our employees are physically exhausted. Right now, we're at a tipping point. We can't add any more to this.
For ABC News Live, Kaylee Hartung, Los Angeles.
And no indication it's going to let up anytime soon. Our thanks to Kaylee. And adding to the frustration is that we have a vaccine. We just need to get it distributed. One of the ways a number of states are trying to get the vaccine moving through the population is by converting large venues into so-called vaccination mega sites. Our chief national correspondent, Matt Gutman, is there in hard-hit Los Angeles. Matt, how are these sites set up to work? And do officials expect that they'll really help meet demand, which, as we've seen, is incredibly high, especially on the front lines?
The infrastructure is relatively simple, Lindsay, because it already exists, right? This is the biggest COVID testing site in the country behind me, the parking lot to Dodger Stadium. By the end of the week, they hope they can convert it into being the largest vaccination site in the country. There are plenty of doses out there. California, for instance, has only vaccinated 28% of the people for whom it is allocated vaccine doses. So there's still, hundreds of thousands of doses that are just sitting there on the shelves. And that is the issue right now. Officials across the country are encountering more reluctance to get vaccinated than they originally anticipated. In Riverside County nearby, 50% of the nurses said they did not want the vaccination and did not get it. So the issue is not as much getting, flooding the zone with vaccine doses. It is figuring out a way to entice people, make it easy for them to actually show up at places like this and get that sometimes painful shot in the arm, but obviously so much better than the alternative. And right now, Lindsay, nobody seems to have, anywhere across the country, nobody seems to have a good answer for that.
There's still so many problems with the rollout and distribution. Matt, our thanks to you. When we come back, the young soldier found dead on New Year's Eve after once reporting she was sexually assaulted. The investigation now underway. The Bitcoin boom and the siblings who made an $11 million investment in cryptocurrency, now worth $1 billion today. What you need to know. But up next, so many corporations revoking their support for the politicians who voted to object President-elect Biden's election win, despite it being a fair race. But should these companies be weighing in? Stay with us.
Admit it, these days, what you need to know seems to change, well, like every day. So what is it that you really need to know, want to know, to help you not just get through your day, but make the most of it? Feel smarter, feel better, feel happier. Well, how about a third hour of Good Morning America in the afternoon? GMA 3, what you need to know. It's all about you. Lunchtime at 1 Eastern, 12 Central and Pacific on ABC. This is going to be so good.
Breaking news, context, analysis.
And no shouting. The time is now for ABC News Live.
Get it streaming everywhere, right to you.
People want to know who killed JonBenét Ramsey.
Our grandfather was a detective on one of the biggest unsolved murders in our generation.
He just said, I have a name. I want you to write it down.
He had every person of interest in a spreadsheet.
A confidential list.
The list.
The
list of suspects narrows.
We will find this killer.
Now, new details, new reporting, and the one family searching for a killer. The List, Who Killed JonBenét. Friday at 9/8 Central on ABC.
We all need someone who'll pull no punches and give it to us straight. No bull, no spin. Now imagine getting your news like that. Just give it to me straight. ABC News, straightforward.
What you're seeing right now, this is part of the eye wall. This procession of migrants goes back 2 miles.
There is going to be catastrophic damage.
This fire has made a run. You can see those flames shooting up into the sky.
We are on the jam-packed red carpet.
To the right, guys.
So this is the 4th weekend of protests.
Watch ABC News on location for Facebook Watch.
What's the most innovative daily news podcast out there to listen to every day? Well, the Edward R. Murrow Awards say it's Start Here, the daily news podcast from ABC News. Even the New York Times calls us a top news podcast worth listening to. So if you like getting behind the biggest news stories of the day, inside all the details, the backstory, and what will happen next, then listen to Start Here, the daily news podcast from ABC News. It's like no other news podcast out there. Even the critics agree. Listen free on Apple Podcasts.
Thank you for making World News Tonight with David Muir, America's most watched newscast.
Welcome back, everyone. As the fallout over the attack on Capitol Hill continues, multiple corporations are now taking a stand and choosing a side as more companies are pulling funding from Republicans who supported overturning the Electoral College results. ABC News business correspondent Deirdre Bolton brings us the latest on companies that are turning on Trump and his allies.
In the aftermath of the Capitol Hill attack, private companies are taking action against President Trump. The CEO of Yonder, a company that specializes in information and branding integrity, says the days of companies being neutral on political, social, or cultural movements are over.
Corporations have a cultural responsibility. And I think in a lot of ways they've asked for it, and they recognize that they need to fulfill this contract that they've made with the public and their consumers.
Marriott is suspending donations to Republican senators who objected to certifying President-elect Joe Biden's electoral victory. A hotel chain spokesperson is quoted as saying, "We have taken the destructive events at the Capitol to undermine a legitimate and fair election into consideration. We will be pausing political giving from our Political Action Committee to those who voted against certification of the election." The Blue Cross Blue Shield Association also said it will suspend contributions to lawmakers who, quote, voted to undermine our democracy. Some business leaders have seemed conflicted these past 4 years. The Trump administration made many polarizing decisions and also enacted so-called business-friendly ones, including a 2017 tax overhaul that delivered a windfall to corporations and wealthy individuals. But Wednesday prompted action for some. Simon & Schuster canceled a book deal it had with Missouri Senator Josh Hawley. Senator Hawley led the fight in Congress, objecting to President-elect Joe Biden's win. Hawley was seen raising a fist in solidarity to Trump supporters on Wednesday during the insurgency. Senator Hawley tweeted about what he called the woke mob at Simon & Schuster and called the company's decision Orwellian.
Corporations have really leaned into brand. They've asked a lot of their consumers. They've said, believe in our brand, get behind our brand. We have purpose, we have values. And now consumers are holding them accountable.
On Sunday night, the PGA announced cancellation of its contract with the Trump National Golf Club in Bedminster, New Jersey for the 2022 championship, citing the tragic events of last week. The CEO added, "We find ourselves in a political situation not of our making. We're fiduciaries for our members, for the game, for our mission, and for our brand." A spokesperson for the Trump Organization says it is incredibly disappointed and the decision is a breach of contract.
To be sure, organizations are making difficult decisions in a complex environment. Financial tech firm Stripe reportedly stopping processing payments to the Trump campaign website and Trump fundraising website. We reached out to Stripe. We have not heard back yet directly from the company. Forbes, a publisher, putting out a very strong statement about anybody who worked in the Trump administration communications team. I'm going to quote it here. "Hire any of Trump's fellow fabulists above, and Forbes will assume that everything your company or firm talks about is a lie. We're going to scrutinize, double check, investigate with the same skepticism we'd approach a Trump tweet." Lindsay?
Wow, some scathing words there, Deirdre. Our thanks to you. Still ahead here on Prime, the Converse CoverGirl controversy. How Vogue magazine ended up picturing Vice President-elect Kamala Harris in her sneakers, and did she sign off? The Pope's personal doctor has died of COVID complications. When will the pontiff get vaccinated? And with another impeachment looming, we take a look at how long other impeachment proceedings have taken by the numbers. But first, our tweet of the day. The lawmaker who got tested for COVID after that mob stormed the Capitol, she's now positive.
This is what being live is all about. This is ABC News Live, the 24/7 streaming news source, ABC News. Wow. Breaking news, live events as they happen, streaming live, non-stop, straight to you. Original, on the edge, breakthrough storytelling from ABC News, National Geographic, ESPN, all designed differently for you to stream straight to any screen whenever you want, free. And imagine the most celebrated, epic live events and moments, all playing out right before your eyes.
See those flames behind me?
And go deeper inside the groundbreaking exclusives from the campaign trail only ABC News gets. Watch ABC News Live right now and anytime. Streaming on Roku, Hulu, Facebook, and abcnews.com.
ABC News Live. Streaming everywhere, right to you.
ABC News Live.
The Americans here on the ground and the Iraqis. 18,000 tons. Patatas. Ismail? David.
Over ground zero from Hurricane Michael.
You can see just home after home.
David, nice to meet you.
This was your view.
My favorite view.
Thank you very much.
Yes, mornings may look different these days, but where you start your day,
where you spend your mornings, where you get connected to everything that's happening.
And face it, there's a whole lot happening in our world these days.
Where you get all the breaking new information of the day to help you navigate through these times.
That's why we're here.
Good morning, sunshine.
And making sure you start your day off with a smile and some sunshine.
Good morning, America.
Good morning, America.
Good morning, America. Oh, how I love saying that.
Wake me up.
ABC News, America's #1 news source. Straightforward news, straight to the heart of the story. ABC News, straightforward. ABC News honored winner for the second straight year with the Edward R. Murrow Award for Overall Excellence in Television. ABC News, America's #1 news source.
This is GMA3, what you need to know. GMA3.
A third hour of Good Morning America in the afternoon.
It's all about you. Lunchtime on ABC.
Welcome back, everyone. And now we take a closer look by the numbers at the impeachment threat by House Democrats, a rare move in the history of our country and an unprecedented one this close to the inauguration. Just 9 days before President Trump leaves office, House Democrats filed a single article of impeachment against him for incitement of insurrection. With at least 218 House members co-sponsoring the impeachment article, Trump could become the first president in U.S. history to be impeached twice. Only 3 U.S. presidents have been impeached. Presidents Donald Trump, Bill Clinton, and Andrew Jackson. A fourth, Richard Nixon, resigned when faced with impeachment and removal. The U.S. Senate has held 20 impeachment trials for public officials, mostly judges. The process takes time, though. Nearly 8 weeks passed between President Clinton's impeachment and Senate acquittal. It was 7 weeks for President Trump. And now, if the House votes to impeach President Trump this week, a possible Senate trial almost certainly wouldn't begin until after Joe Biden becomes president. We still have lots to get to here on Prime tonight. The investigation continues into that deadly plane crash, the aircraft plummeting not long after takeoff. What went wrong? In 2009, you could buy a Bitcoin for about a penny. Now, each one is worth about $30,000, creating scores of new millionaires. Is this the new gold? But first, a look at our top trending stories on abcnews.com.
ABC News honored winner of 4 Edward R. Murrow Awards, including the most prestigious honor, Overall Excellence in Television. ABC News, America's #1 news choice.
The time is now for ABC News Live.
Get it streaming everywhere, right to you.
People want to know who killed JonBenet Ramsey.
Friday night, one man who was on a mission.
He had every person of interest.
A confidential list.
That list.
The list of suspects narrows.
Who killed JonBenet? Friday on ABC. Now, when it matters most, the straightforward facts. ABC News is America's #1 news. #1 in the morning. #1 in the evening. With America's most watched newscast. #1 in late night versus the competition. The #1 #1 news magazine on Friday nights, #1 in politics across this historic election versus the competition, the #1 daytime talk show, and #1 in streaming news. ABC News is America's #1 news.
What's the most innovative daily news podcast out there to listen to every day? Well, the Edward R. Murrow Awards say it's Start Here, the daily news podcast from ABC News. Even the New York Times calls us a top news podcast worth listening to. So if you like getting behind the biggest news stories of the day, inside all the details, the backstory, and what will happen next, then listen to Start Here, the daily news podcast from ABC News. It's like no other news podcast out there. Even the critics agree. Listen free on Apple Podcasts.
Yes, mornings may look different these days, but where you start your day,
where you spend your mornings, where you get connected to everything that's happening.
And face it, there's a whole lot happening in our world these days.
Where you get all the breaking new information of the day to help you navigate through these times.
That's why we're here.
Good morning, sunshine.
And making sure you start your day off with a smile and some sunshine.
Good morning, America.
Good morning, America.
Good morning, America. Oh, how I love saying that.
Wake me up.
The most powerful stories of our time, anytime. Nightline.
Friday nights, 9/8 Central. True crime, cinematic, real-life drama, stunning, the unthinkable. Follow the clues. The Hunt. True crime. 2020. Friday nights, 9/8 Central on ABC.
No president has ever been impeached twice, but this week that distinction could fall on President Trump. Congressional Democrats say that if Vice President Mike Pence and the cabinet do not invoke the 25th Amendment and remove the president, they will vote on impeachment for incitement of insurrection.
He has done something so serious that there should be prosecution against him.
The mayor of D.C. is now requesting additional security for President-elect Joe Biden's inauguration next week.
If I'm scared of anything, it's for our democracy.
Meanwhile, the far-right social media platform Parler has filed a federal lawsuit against Amazon in response to being kicked off its web services following the siege at the Capitol. Parler claims that it's the victim of an antitrust violation and breach of contract. Parler has also been banned from Apple's App Store and Google's Play Store.
President-elect Biden receiving his second dose of the COVID-19 vaccine. Nationwide, the CDC says almost 9 million people have received their first dose of the vaccine. In Los Angeles, the nation's largest testing site at Dodger Stadium is closed and being turned into a vaccination site. All other ballparks and stadiums across the country are doing the same.
It's being reported Pope Francis's personal doctor has died of complications due to COVID. The 78-year-old was being treated for cancer. It's unclear when the Pope was last seen by the doctor. Francis, a proponent of the vaccine, is expected to get the jab this week.
Unanswered questions surrounding the death of 19-year-old Army soldier Asia Graham, found dead inside her barracks at Fort Bliss in Texas on New Year's Eve. And according to Fort Bliss officials, last June, Graham reported to her chain of command that another soldier sexually assaulted her back in December of 2019. The investigation into her assault took several months, charges not formally brought against the unnamed soldier until October. 2 months later, she was dead. Army investigators saying foul play is not suspected in her death. Now this morning, that unnamed soldier is facing a full court-martial after being charged with assault.
The search continues for answers after a weekend crash of a passenger jet into the waters off Indonesia.
Saturday afternoon, the plane plummeted 10,000 feet in just 30 seconds. Only minutes after takeoff, 62 people feared dead, including 7 children and 3 infants.
The Sriwijaya Airjet was a Boeing 737, but not a MAX.
Officials say they have detected pings from the black box flight recorders and have located them, but have yet to retrieve them.
Over the weekend, the cover of the February issue of Vogue featuring the vice president-elect leaked. The cover's unplanned early release immediately drawing criticism for not measuring up to what's expected from the leading fashion magazine, slamming the photo for looking like an amateur snapshot, even though it was shot by accomplished photographer Tyler Mitchell, a person with direct knowledge of the negotiations, telling ABC News that Harris's team believed a different image shot by the same photographer would cover the print edition. ABC learning that Harris's team chose both outfits. The fashion magazine telling ABC News the team at Vogue felt the more informal image captured Vice President-elect Harris's authentic, approachable nature, which we feel is one of the hallmarks of the Biden-Harris administration. To respond to the seriousness of this moment in history and the role she has to play leading our country forward, we're celebrating both images of her as covers digitally.
Welcome back. For many, Bitcoin is something that people have heard about, but they don't quite understand. For others, it's helped make them millionaires. Cryptocurrency prices surged last week during the storming of the Capitol, but today they've plummeted. It is a volatile market that is rapidly growing, and as Rebecca Jarvis explains, some consider it digital gold.
Bitcoin hit a record high over the weekend.
The hot assets that we have been watching this year, Bitcoin, of course, has been near the top of the list.
One unit of that currency is currently worth almost $33,000 US.
Bitcoin, it's the digital currency. You've probably heard something about at this point. Those stories about early investors striking it rich, hitting gold. Remember those guys from The Social Network, the Winklevoss twins?
This idea is potentially worth millions of dollars. Millions.
They put $11 million into Bitcoin back in 2013. Now, they're billionaires. Twitter co-founder and CEO Jack Dorsey has been a Bitcoin advocate from the start. Billionaire philanthropist Bill Gates got one as a birthday present.
Somebody gave me some for my birthday, and then a few years later, I thought, hey, I'm going to sell that.
Even rapper Megan Thee Stallion recently did a Bitcoin giveaway. But what exactly is it? Bitcoin is the world's most popular cryptocurrency. It's a digital currency that you could use like cash, but unlike other currencies, it isn't backed by any government. You don't keep it in a bank or carry it in your pocket. It exists solely online. You can use it to get a hotel room on Expedia, buy furniture on Overstock, but that's not actually how most people are using it.
People are buying Bitcoin to store their wealth in.
Mike Novogratz is a billionaire former hedge fund manager and philanthropist.
So it was born out of a distrust of the system. And it was originally fueled by people that wanted to live off the grids and computer hackers. And what we've seen is that has morphed into this vibrant ecosystem where institutions started coming in more and more.
He first discovered Bitcoin 7 years ago. Now he's one of the biggest crypto investors in the world through his financial services firm, Galaxy Digital.
So what do you do then if you're the average person? We know your long-term thesis is that it's going higher, but in the near term, it could be very volatile.
I think, 3 to 4% of your net worth should be in Bitcoin.
Even if you don't have any savings on the sidelines?
Well, if you don't have any savings, you don't have any savings. And so then it's certainly more risky. But if you have some savings, even a small amount will help.
When Bitcoin began a little over a decade ago, you could buy one for less than a penny. Today, it's worth more than $30,000.
Bitcoin, the cryptocurrency.
The wild price swings feeding skeptics and the crypto diehards alike.
There's a lot of instability in the world. Over 25% of all U.S. dollars in circulation have been printed in the last year. We used to call Bitcoin a bubble, but the dollar and fiat currencies are looking a lot more like a bubble these days.
So you're even more bullish on it today than you were when we first met.
Yeah, look at the adoption of it today. I just don't think there are enough doubters to ever make it valueless.
We met Jeremy Gardner back in 2017 in San Francisco.
So this is it?
This is the crypto castle.
Think of it as a dorm room meets think tank.
Interesting.
Led by Jeremy. Jeremy calls himself a venture capitalist and cryptocurrency evangelist.
Are you a millionaire?
Yes.
many times over.
If you are a holder of Bitcoin and it goes to zero, what happens?
Well, then you don't have any. But the reason why I actually don't believe that can happen anymore is that there's so many people in the world that believe so deeply in it. There are always going to be people to buy more Bitcoin. So as long as there are sellers, there will always be buyers.
In addition to betting on the currency itself, many are also betting on the underlying technology that makes Bitcoin work. Each transaction is recorded in a public digital ledger called the blockchain.
Blockchain is essentially the fundamental technology that gave rise to Bitcoin. The industry likes to coin the term Web 3.0. It's a more secure way in not only the processing, but handling of information that's currently used on the internet.
Krista McFarlane is the founder and CEO of Patientory, a healthcare company that relies on the underlying technology of the blockchain to exist.
We use the technology to basically create a streamlined data access for private health information and to unlock that to individuals so they can start to own their health data.
So in the same way that the blockchain allows people to own Bitcoin, it also allows people to own their health information.
Exactly. I would say 3 or 4 years, there's been an increase in the number of ransomware attacks on healthcare, systems, which most people don't realize, that can shut an entire hospital down. So the technology is, a new way of safeguarding that information and data.
It's a far cry from its not-so-distant dark past. Bitcoin, once the preferred currency to buy drugs and other illicit items on black market site Silk Road, which was eventually shut down by the FBI. Today, with more widespread adoption, the bigger question, is the hype overblown?
What do you say to this idea that it is a bubble right now?
There's a bubble in everything right now. There's a bubble in Tesla stock. There's a bubble in, Peloton. What's unique about Bitcoin, there are no more Bitcoin. And so as people want to buy them, they're only the 21 million. It's the only commodity I've ever seen without a supply response.
Novogratz arguing that a finite amount of Bitcoin could make it the new digital gold.
Right now, we're about 5% of gold or 4% of gold. Why can't Bitcoin be 10% of gold and 20% of gold? For it to become gold, Bitcoin would go to 600,000. That sounded like fantasy 2 years ago, and now I actually think we'll get there in 3 or 4 years.
But if the last 48 hours are any guide, be prepared for a roller coaster ride to reach those lofty heights. For ABC News Live, I'm Rebecca Jarvis.
To Bitcoin or not to Bitcoin? That's the question. Our thanks to Rebecca. We'll be right back with our image of the day.
Now, when it matters most, the straightforward facts. ABC News is America's #1 news. #1 in the morning, #1 in the evening, with America's most watched newscast. #1 in late night versus the competition. The #1 news magazine on Friday nights. #1 in politics across this historic election versus the competition. The #1 daytime talk show. And #1 in streaming news. ABC News is America's #1 news.
The most powerful stories of our time, anytime. Nightline.
People want to know who killed JonBenet Ramsey.
Friday night, one man who was on a mission.
He had every person of interest.
A confidential list.
That list.
The list of suspects narrow.
Who killed JonBenet? Friday on ABC.
Admit it. These days, what you need to know
Seems to change just about every day.
What is it that you really want to know, need to know,
To help you not just get through your day,
but to make the most of it? Feel smarter.
feel better.
Feel happier.
Well, how about a third hour of Good Morning America in the afternoon?
GMA 3, what you need to know. Lunchtime at 1 Eastern, 12 Central and Pacific on ABC. It's all about you.
What you're seeing right now, this is part of the eye wall. This procession of migrants goes back 2 miles.
There is going to be catastrophic damage.
This fire has made a run. You can see those flames shooting up into the sky.
We are on the jam-packed red carpet.
To the right, guys. So this is the fourth weekend of protest.
Watch ABC News on location for Facebook Watch.
Breaking news, context, analysis.
With today's extraordinary news cycle,
now is the perfect time for ABC News Live.
A streaming news game changer. The time is now for ABC News Live. Get it, streaming everywhere.
The world may feel out of your control, but your happiness doesn't have to be. Learn the secrets to happiness. Listen to the 10% Happier podcast, free on Apple Podcasts.
More Americans choose ABC News, America's #1 news source.
Before we go tonight, our image of the day. A Capitol Hill police officer wearing a black band over his badge in honor of Officer Brian Sicknick, who died as a mob inspired by the President of the United States stormed the Capitol. Will this lead to the second impeachment of President Trump? Still to be determined. That is our show for this hour. Be sure to stay tuned to ABC News Live for more context and analysis of the day's top stories. I'm Lindsay Davis. Thanks so much for streaming with us, and good night.